Hello, Taylor Wood, your mad scientist and magical experimenter at magicalexperiments.com. Today, I'm going to talk about how to derive techniques from pop culture. I've lately been reading the Dresden Files by Jim Butcher, one of my favorite series. And one of the things that I like about the Dresden Files is that the author does a really good job of explaining how magic works. And actually, no surprise here, I think he's done a fair amount of research into, um, magical practices, because a lot of what he talks about is really similar to how, uh, magicians approach things. Of course, there are some differences, and so far as I know, I haven't seen anyone running around throwing fire around or anything along those lines, as occurs in the Dresden verse. But nonetheless, there is some really useful techniques that we can take away from from that series, and really, what I'm going to share here applies to pop culture in general. So when you look at a given pop culture, in terms of finding inspiration for your magical techniques, one of the things that I always like to do is look at the actual rules of magic, or the mechanics of magic as it's explained in the given pop culture. Now, if you have a pop culture that you like where magic isn't a part of it, that doesn't mean you can't get inspiration from magical techniques. It just means that you might need to look at the mechanics of whatever else is in place for that particular universe. In the case of the Dresden verse, it is magic, so what we're looking for really are the explanations of how Harry Dresden is doing whatever it is that he's doing. So for one example, he talks about mixing potions, or he talks about using his shield bracelet or something like that. There's certain mechanics in place that the author is explaining. And what we can look at for that is we can say, okay, well, how could I take this idea and actually apply it to my own magic? Well, let's say in the case of, using the example of the Dresden verse, if we were to do a magical working um, around a particular item, such as a shield bracelet or a ring or something like that, well, as it happens, we can enchant physical objects to do certain things, or to help us accomplish things. That's why sometimes people wear necklaces or whatever else, because those necklaces or whatever have been imbued with um, specific attributes. I have an elephant necklace that I wear as an example, and that elephant necklace, what it does is it's a protection. It's protection. Um, has protection magic on it, and so that protection magic, when I'm wearing that necklace, is activated. So that's an example right there of where you're taking something from pop culture and you're applying it to magical practices. If you look at your own pop culture, whatever it is that you like, pay attention to those mechanics, and then ask yourself the question, how could I actually apply the mechanics, the rules, if you will, of this pop culture to what it is that I'm trying to do? And what you'll find is that you'll usually come up with some type of workable solution. And the reason for that is because a lot of times what we're finding is that, even like with pop culture, the explanations can be a bit fantastical, but they're still going to follow certain lines of thought, certain ways of thinking. And those ways of thinking can in turn be applied to actual actions that we take. I mean, look at Harry Potter, for example. Yeah, we don't see people running around swishing wands, per se, and levitating objects or anything like that. But the idea that, for example, you could come up with a Patronus charm, that you could create an entity, it's pretty workable. And the explanation in the book makes a lot of sense. Now, guess what? There are a lot of magical books out there that already explain some of these concepts. And so you might say to me, well, Taylor, why don't I just turn to those magic books? And I'd say, hey, great, go ahead and do that. But at the same time, be open to allowing yourself to be inspired by the pop culture that you like. Because sometimes what you find with that pop culture is that it gives you a way of thinking about what you're doing with your magical practice, and that way of thinking can be translated into action. There's no reason not to explore or see how pop culture can be translated into actual magical actions that you do. Open yourself up to the mechanics, the rules of the pop culture, and ask yourself, could I apply this to my magical practice? If I can, what is it that I can do with it? You'll find that it opens up a lot of doors for you when you take that approach, because you're approaching it from a place of inquisitiveness, and you're experimenting. You're seeing what actually happens. I got a great idea from Harry Dresden. At one point in the book, the author talks about how the character uses, like when he's jogging, he uses the fact that he's jogging to power up his rings. And I thought that's a really cool idea. So what I did is I took that idea and I applied it to a lot of my magical work, with the notion that when I'm doing different activities, those activities are going to, the energy from those activities is going to go into and feed the magical work that I'm doing. Perfect example of taking the mechanics of a pop culture universe and actually applying it, because it can work in our magical work. Maybe not as splashy or as Hollywood as the pop culture, but hey, that's alright. What matters is that it's actually doing something, and that we can draw on it and apply it to the magical principles that we already know are at work. Have a comment or idea about how you could apply pop culture to practical magical work? Feel free to leave it below. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please go over here and click on the T. Thanks very much and have a great day.